If you treat your birthday like a normal day, let me confront you with something uncomfortable. You might have a psychological pattern that most people don't understand, and the fact that birthdays feel ordinary to you could reveal a very specific mindset about identity, time, and self-worth. Most people see birthdays as emotional milestones, but if you quietly ignore them, avoid celebrating them, or treat them like any other day, you're already outside the dominant social psychology script. And that difference says more about your brain than you realize. Here's the uncomfortable truth: society conditions us to see birthdays as validation rituals, moments where attention, gifts, and recognition reinforce social belonging. Developmental psychologist Erik Erikson's identity theory suggested that human identity forms partly through social feedback loops, which means rituals like birthdays act as symbolic checkpoints of social value. So if birthdays don't matter to you, it often means your identity regulation system works differently. The first accusation: you might not care about external validation as much as others. Problem: when people treat birthdays like normal days, others sometimes interpret it as emotional detachment or coldness. Psychological explanation: Research in Self-Determination Theory by Edward Deci and Richard Ryan, 1985. Shows that people with high intrinsic motivation rely less on external reward systems for self-worth. In other words, if you treat birthdays like normal days, your psychological reward circuitry, especially dopamine responses linked to social approval, may simply not depend on ceremonial recognition. The solution is not forcing celebration but understanding that intrinsic identity regulation often produces independence from social rituals. Second accusation: you might have a stronger perception of time than most people. Problem: birthdays represent the passing of time, and some individuals experience what psychologists call temporal self-continuity differently. Research by psychologist Hal Hershfield, 2011, on future self-continuity found that people who think deeply about time often see life less in symbolic checkpoints and more as continuous cognitive flow. That means birthdays don't feel psychologically significant, they're simply another point in an ongoing narrative. Your brain processes life through long-term trajectory thinking rather than milestone psychology. This often activates areas of the prefrontal cortex responsible for long-range planning and introspective cognition. Third accusation: you may have a more introspective personality structure. Problem: when people celebrate birthdays loudly, it reinforces collective identity. When someone quietly ignores them, it signals inward orientation. Personality research on introspection and metacognition, particularly studies by psychologist John Flavel in the 1970s, show that individuals with higher metacognitive awareness tend to evaluate their lives internally rather than through social events. That means your brain uses reflective cognition instead of symbolic rituals to measure growth. You don't wait for a birthday to assess your life, you do it constantly through internal narrative evaluation. Fourth accusation: you might subconsciously reject cultural scripts. Social psychologist Erving Goffman's work on social rituals and role performance explains that many celebrations function as identity performances rather than authentic experiences. Birthdays, in this sense, are theatrical reaffirmations of social bonds. But people who treat birthdays like normal days often disengage from performative identity structures. Their brains show stronger preference for authenticity-driven behavior rather than ritual-driven behavior. Fifth accusation: you might have experienced emotional conditioning around attention and celebration. Some individuals who minimize birthdays develop psychological independence early in life. Attachment research, including work by Mary Ainsworth and John Bowlby, shows that people who learned emotional self-regulation earlier often detach from symbolic reassurance rituals. Their reward system becomes less reactive to collective celebration and more tuned to personal autonomy. Sixth accusation, and this is where the rare mindset appears: you may perceive meaning through progress rather than recognition. Neuroscience research on goal-directed cognition shows that individuals with high internal locus of control activate neural circuits associated with personal agency more strongly than circuits tied to social approval. That means a birthday does not feel like proof of worth, it's just a reminder that time passed and the real question is whether you used it well. Notice what this mindset does: instead of asking who remembered my birthday, your brain asks what did I build this year? Instead of measuring life through applause, you measure it through trajectory. Instead of seeking celebration, you evaluate direction. This creates a subtle psychological tension because society interprets birthdays as emotional checkpoints while your cognition interprets them as chronological markers. And that difference can make people misunderstand you. They assume you're indifferent, distant, or antisocial. But what's actually happening is cognitive independence from symbolic validation systems. The rare mindset is this: your sense of identity is not synchronized with collective rituals. You don't need a specific day to feel valuable. You don't need ceremonial attention to confirm existence. Your brain processes life as a continuous narrative of growth rather than episodic celebrations. In psychological terms, this resembles what researchers call autonomous identity regulation. An internalized system where meaning is generated through self-reflection instead of social reinforcement. And when someone reaches that point, birthdays stop functioning as emotional anchors. They become what they actually are, another ordinary rotation of the planet around the sun. But here's the twist most people miss. The same mindset that makes birthdays feel ordinary also correlates with higher long-term introspection, stronger independence from social pressure, and deeper existential awareness. You stop measuring life by applause and start measuring it by alignment between who you are and what you are building. And once that cognitive shift happens, the calendar loses power over your identity. The real milestone becomes something much harder and much rarer to achieve, living a life that makes sense to you even when nobody is celebrating it.